gardeners, welcome back to my channel. Today I am joined by Oakley, my crested gecko, and let's pray that she does not poop on me today because that is something that she enjoys doing. So in today's video, I want to talk about some things that are must-haves when it comes to keeping reptiles. So I thought it would be kind of interesting because Tinley is rolling around, which is one of the biggest reptile shows in the country. So that's going to be coming in October, and I'm kind of like making a shopping list of things that I need. And as I was thinking about this, I thought it would be a great idea to write down things that basically every average keeper should have at their house, just to make it helpful for them and their animals. So this list kind of depends on what animals you're keeping, because some things are geared more towards snakes and others more towards geckos, or whatever the case may be. So hopefully some of this will be helpful depending on what you're keeping, but I'm gonna jump right into it now. So the first item that I think reptile keepers should have, even if it's a snake or a lizard, whatever the case may be, is ReptiSafe. So ReptiSafe is very important for all reptiles because it's very important to make sure that any water that you're going to be using for your reptiles is dechlorinated and safe for them. And this doesn't just apply for the water bowls for where your animals are going to be drinking. This also applies for the water that you will be misting on your animals' enclosures if they require a high humidity level. So misting systems and water bowls, everything should be treated with ReptiSafe to make sure that the water is dechlorinated and safe for your reptiles. So the next one is geared more towards like geckos and lizards, not really snakes. But it's very important if you do have a gecko or a lizard, and that is supplementation. So for supplementation, I would recommend for any reptile keeper to have calcium without D3, calcium with D3, and a multivitamin. If you're not really sure how to use that for your animals, because there are different ways to use it depending on what reptile you're keeping, I have an entire video on it. That's Supplementation 101. I will put the link in my description so that way you guys can check it out if you need help. So again, supplementation isn't really going to be for the snakes, but if you have lizards or amphibians, geckos, it's very important for all of those. So make sure that you get the supplementation and that you do it correctly. Number 3, again, this depends on what animal you're keeping, but a mister is very important, especially if you have geckos or a lizard that requires a high humidity level. If you need to be spraying down the enclosure every single day, a mister is very, very helpful. I actually have a huge one that I got for really cheap at Home Depot, so I would highly recommend going to Home Depot to get your mister, because the ones that they sell at reptile stores are actually more expensive and way smaller, and you just go through so much water and you have to keep refilling it, so it gets really annoying, especially if you have a lot of animals. So I would recommend going to Home Depot to get yourself a mister. The next thing that's really important for reptile keepers to have are feeding tongs. So not every single reptile keeper will be using tongs, but a lot of them do, especially the people that don't like touching bugs and they don't want to touch them with their hands, so they want a tong feed. It's also a way to like bond with your animal and get them used to you. And especially if you're feeding snakes, because you absolutely don't want to be holding a rat by the tail and then have a snake strike and accidentally miss and snap at your hand, because that would really, really ruin your day. Well, not really ruin your day. It's not that big of a deal, but it's just not something that you want to have happen, and it could easily be avoided by using tongs. And they come in many different sizes. They sell them all the time at reptile shows. So if you have a really big snake, I would recommend getting a bigger tong, just because I don't know if it's just my snakes, but a lot of the time they actually do miss quite a bit. So you just want to save yourself from getting bitten. So the next thing that I think would be great for reptiles to have is actually Vetericyn. I think that's how it's pronounced. This is actually a spray that works as like a neosporin for reptiles and amphibians. So if your animal does have a burn or some type of injury, it's great to have this item on hand so that way you can make sure that the animal does not get infected. So it basically just keeps the wound clean. I'm not saying that you should use this instead of going to a vet, because obviously if your animal is really injured, it really needs that medical attention from a veterinarian, but it's nice to have something at home for like the little wounds or something here or there that you easily can fix at home by just making sure that the wound doesn't get worse if it's a small little thing, and you can keep it from getting infected. So I highly recommend it. You can actually get this stuff from Chewy.com. That's where I got mine. It's made especially for reptiles, so I think it's a great thing to have on hand if you are a reptile keeper. The next thing that I think every reptile keeper should have is a thermostat. So this is especially important if you have heating pads for snakes or a lizard, whatever the case. But if you have a heating pad, you absolutely for sure should have a thermostat to make sure that the heating pad does not get overheated and injure your animal. So it's a great way to regulate the temperature in the enclosure, the heating pad, and make sure that there's no harm that's going to be caused to your animals. Next thing that every reptile keeper should have is a humidity gauge. So a humidity gauge is something that you put in the enclosure and it measures the humidity levels and lets you guys know exactly what it is, especially if you're keeping a high humidity animal, to make sure that you're keeping it on point. That way you can avoid any bacteria infections or respiratory infections. Obviously, your animal needs the proper humidity, so this is the perfect way to measure that and make sure that you're doing everything correctly. So the next thing that I think is so important to keep if you're a reptile keeper is actually a temperature gun. So you don't have to get like a reptile formulated temperature gun. You can literally just get them on Amazon, and that's exactly what I did. But obviously, if you're using a thermostat with a heating pad, I still like to take the precaution and check everything and check the temperatures within the enclosure by using the temperature gun. You can do the same thing with basking bulbs. It's a great way to make sure that your animals are getting the proper heat that they need, and you can check the variability in the enclosure to make sure that everything is on point. The next thing that I think is great for reptile keepers is actually not really that required, but it's kind of a good idea depending on your lifestyle. But obviously these animals need lighting and heating pads and all of that. So something that could be very helpful is actually using a timer for your lights that will automatically turn your lights on for you and off for you. I don't use this because I'm home every day, so I'm able to do it myself and I just don't have the need. But maybe if you're someone that works late or you're just not home a lot of the time during the day, it's a great way to make sure that your animals are getting the lighting that they need and it gets turned on and off at the proper times every single day. The next thing that's very important is geared more towards snakes, obviously, and it is a snake hook. So if you have a more defensive snake that's nervous around you and you're not really comfortable handling it or taking it out of the enclosure, a snake hook is very, very important for you to make sure you aren't getting bitten. And it's a great way to also approach your animal and let them know that you're coming in, so that way they can get used to you and hopefully just create a better relationship with you over time. Oh, the next one on my list is like definitely not required for every single reptile keeper, but I do think it's hilarious and important. So my friend keeps Halmahera geckos, and they're very similar to day geckos in that their defense for getting away is that they can literally drop their skin, or not drop it, but it, what's the word? It sloughs off. That's the word. So if you aggressively touch one of these animals, their skin can slough off, and these animals are very fast and love to escape. So her way around this is a pool noodle. So a pool noodle can be great for escapee geckos that are very sensitive with their skin, in order to kind of direct them to where you want them to go, and they may even climb onto the pool noodle so that way you can get them back in your enclosure. Obviously, this is not a problem that every single reptile keeper has, but I thought I would mention it for those that do keep day geckos or even Halmahera geckos. The next thing that I think is great for reptile keepers that have to feed primarily insects to their animals are basically just little feeding tubs for those animals, so that way the insects can be gut loaded in those containers before you feed them off to your animals. And also with that, I think it's great to also just have containers in general. In case you have to bring your animals to the vet, it's always important to have something there so that way you can get your animal to the vet properly, so that way they're safe and they can't escape on your way to the vet, because I'm sure that would be loads of fun. But some people just use bags. I think it's great to use critter keepers, but again, it depends on what animal you have. If you have a huge snake, obviously it's not going to fit in a critter keeper, but it's something to keep in mind. And the last thing on my list that every reptile keeper should have, this goes more towards the supplementation part. So I actually use little plastic bags that are labeled, and I have a calcium with D3, a calcium without D3, and a multivitamin bag. You want to keep them all separated because you're never supposed to dust all of them at the same exact time. So that's why I use separate bags, and it's important to label them because obviously all of these powders are white and they look very similar. So you want to know which powder you're going to be using and make sure that you're only using that one at that time, and you're not going to be contaminating the powders within the same bag. So I hope that made sense. That was like a weird way to phrase it. But yeah, those are all of the things that I think are must-haves for reptile keepers. I'm sure there are so many more that I'm leaving out. So if you can think of any, please leave it in a comment. I would love to see what you guys think. I hope that this video was helpful for you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Say bye, Oakley.